Well, indeed, Europe is paying attention to the issue too. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for the UN Security Council to take action on the migrant crisis in Libya. He's held talks with Guinean President Alpha Conde, who is also the head of the African Union. The two leaders have discussed how to improve the situation and living conditions of African migrants held in Libya. Elena Casas reports from Paris.
It was the first official meeting between Emmanuel Macron and Alpha Conde, and the two presidents focused on the plight of African migrants in Libya. Referring to a video that showed migrants trapped in Libya being sold as slaves by trafficking gangs, Macron called on the UN Security Council to take action.
A debate started yesterday at the Security Council. It must lead to concrete actions and concrete resolutions. As such, I wish that we could go much further in the fight against traffickers who commit such crimes and cooperate with all countries in the region in dismantling these networks.
The Guinean president echoed Macron's remarks, saying the situation is unacceptable.
It's an unacceptable situation, not just the selling, but even the conditions that they are kept in. It's an absolutely inhumane situation.
European nations have come under fire from human rights groups in recent months for providing funding to tackle the migration crisis in Libya that NGOs say is going at least partly to the militias responsible for the trafficking. An EU scheme to fund and train the Libyan Coast Guard does seem to have led to a significant drop in the number of people crossing the Mediterranean, but it's left tens of thousands of African migrants stranded in Libya and at the mercy of militias. Macron admitted the lack of a stable government in Libya makes it very difficult for international pressure to eradicate trafficking. He tried to broker a deal between the two main rival Libyan militias in July, but it has since collapsed. Macron has also come under fire for suggesting the EU should create processing centres in Libya where African migrants could apply for asylum in Europe. Elena Casas, CGTN, Paris.
Well, let's bring you more now on this particular story. I'm joined by CGTN's Giles Gibson in Washington, D.C., as well as our correspondent Yasser Hakim, live for us in Cairo. Giles, let's start with you. Of course, as we just heard there, French President Emmanuel Macron calling on the UN Security Council to respond to what's happening in Libya. Just talk us through what options are available to the Security Council.
Well, the French have been very specific about what they're calling on from the international community in the wake of these reports that have come out of Libya. The French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, he's talked about how the international community should go much further in the fight against traffickers who commit such crimes. And he's also talked about dismantling existing trafficking networks. Now, on the UN side of this, the United Nations side of this, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, he's called for a possible investigation into possible crimes against humanity in the wake of this reporting by CNN originally about possible slavery auctions inside Libya. Really, the expectation is that despite that call by the French for a UN Security Council meeting on this entire issue, the expectation is that we won't see action at that sort of level, that high level of the United Nations. Instead, what the UN is saying is that they want more countries to join existing United Nations frameworks that are aimed at dealing with all these sorts of issues. That's, for example, like the UN Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime. So really what the call is from the United Nations is for countries inside that region to join existing frameworks that they have in place that can then try and implement some of those frameworks right inside that region.
Well, Yasser, of course, you are in North Africa following the story from Cairo. We know that these images of migrants being sold as slaves sent shockwaves throughout sub-Saharan Africa, indeed across the world. But what has been the response in the region where you are?
Obviously, it was a huge surprise, shock as well, especially when you know that those are your neighbors, and it could be one of your own country, especially that Morocco itself has also announced that there were hundreds of Moroccans who were sold as slaves in Libya at the time, and we know that a lot of Egyptians have been trying to travel illegally, to migrate illegally through Libya, and there are fears some of them were killed in the road, some of them were killed by the traffickers themselves. So it's been a call for a while now, and the Egyptian president had mentioned this 2 years ago at the UN, calling for the Europeans to help the North Africans and Africa in trying to stop the surge in migration, illegal migration. You've got two ways to do that, either by security means, working hand in hand with European and North African security personnel, and at the same time help develop the economies in these countries so that people would not have to travel or to migrate illegally into Europe or into other countries. And the Egyptians have felt, or the Egyptian president said before last year, that there was not much attention to this. They did not take it seriously, the Europeans. And now, because of the issues of obviously terrorism and the militants going into Europe within the group of the illegal migrants, it has become a serious issue. There are calls here to work together on trying to stop the surge. Egypt has done a lot of effort and is working with the North African countries in this regard.
Absolutely. And just coming back to you, Giles, of course, as Yasser just said over there, the Mediterranean migrant crisis has been a major issue for North Africa and for Europe for a number of years now. But perhaps the extent of the problem wasn't as clear as it has become since this footage was released. Do you think that this now might spur other countries to play a bigger role, other countries within the international community, such as the United States?
Well, there's certainly a lot of pressure coming from the United Nations and from their headquarters in New York on this exact issue. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has talked about the need to address migration flows in a comprehensive and humane manner. His UN human rights chief has also been very critical of the European Union for their policy of helping Libyan authorities to detain migrants inside Libya before they actually try and cross over into the European Union. Really, the issue here is that while there is a lot of political will from these big international organizations like the European Union, like the United Nations based here in the United States, really the issue is going to be implementing some of those existing frameworks inside Libya, which of course is still very much split between those two rival governments, one in Tripoli and one in Tobruk. So really the challenge now is for the United Nations and the European Union to try and implement some of their frameworks, some of their policies inside a country that is really still pretty volatile.
And Yasser, coming back to you, when we look in particular at the issue of migrants that are stuck in Libya, is there a sense that Libya's neighbors, similar to Rwanda, making offers to take in some of those migrants, could Libya's neighbors also assist in a similar way?
Yes, there was a meeting last week with the foreign ministers of Libya's neighbors. It was Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and it was on the agenda of talks. Obviously, the main issue was trying to mediate between the rival factions in Libya. And as Giles has said, obviously this is a big issue that is causing a lot of security concerns and helps the traffickers it eases the traffickers' work when there's no security, that they can take all the migrants through Libya. At the point, yes, Egypt has been fortifying its borders with Libya, working with Libyan security forces. We're talking about 150 kilometers of borders there, and at the same time, sorry, 1,500 kilometers. At the same time, there is on the other side with Tunisia as well, there's a lot of security fortifications. Egypt does try to take some Libyans or some migrants, sorry, from Libya and return them back to their countries before they enter Libya on the borders. And at the moment, they are discussing how to deal with this crisis. Egypt has also been working with the European Union on fortifying also the sea borders with a fleet, an Egyptian armed fleet, a navy fleet, to try to also stop the surge in migration through the Mediterranean Sea. There are efforts, but it's not an easy situation. Security concerns in Libya have halted these efforts, have made it harder to control the illegal migration. And there are ongoing meetings. We believe there's another meeting next week to try to find a solution that would be much more efficient in this regard.
Well, thank you so much. Yasser Hakim live for us there in Cairo. And of course, we've also been joined by Giles Gibson in Washington, D.C., both on the regional and international response to the migrant situation in Libya.